things like the common domain model. So you've got common data standards. You put things onto chain. You have a unified trade record. Suddenly now it's good data in. Therefore, you're using good data as the basis for your information. If you overlay then the idea of artificial intelligence on that, that gives you the ability to understand things better. In the same way that algos learn from the various different models that they utilize in markets, there will be processes that could be there for post-trade processing, for example, where if you've got that golden record, you're then in a position whereby you actually use AI to give you lots more information around what's available and what's possible in that.
What excites you the most about workflow automation?
The world's still changing, and what's clear is that there's a huge amount of inefficiency still in the way that the markets are operating. If I look at it from the Tokenovate perspective, trying to bring together the common domain model, which actually standardizes the market data approach, along with inflection point now of blockchain, smart contracts, and tokenization, then there's a lot of demand there, I think, for collateral mobility. And then more from, I suppose, the pre-trade piece, you then got iPush-Pull that are looking to feed into a number of different chat platforms. I think what the market's been missing is there's a huge amount of data that's in these chat messages that they've not actually been sourcing previously. And part of what iPush-Pull will be doing is actually allowing people to mine that data and act as an omni-channel approach. And then from the CVIX perspective, you've got to look at the benefits of a DeFi approach to a TradFi approach. And certainly there with kind of the way that the crypto world is actually operated, TradFi is looking, I think, towards DeFi in terms of some of the innovation that they could actually utilize to try and make themselves more efficient and go towards more of a 24/7 sort of global sort of world in terms of liquidity.
How do you see the role of chat and messaging evolving in financial markets?
Symphony, I suppose, were the first to market with the ability to really allow chatbots to operate on their chat platform. But what we've seen since then is that all the exchanges are actually developing where their chat sort of capability should be. I would say that ICE are by far the most developed in terms of by buying Yellow Jacket, whatever number of years ago it was, and then converting that into ICE chat. They're really the group that's actually using that to not only allow then flow to come in for execution, but they're actually capturing the true information behind that as well, in terms of mining the information on maybe 80% of the information that isn't going to executions, and understanding how the actual order flow comes together. What you've seen since then is Microsoft made an investment in LSEG, and LSEG are working with Microsoft now to build out what's called Workspace. So they're giving teams an external directory rather than it only just being an internal chat platform. And so therefore they're linking that in, as I understand it, to LinkedIn to get an external directory, move everybody off of Icon, and actually use that as a way for them to actually leverage that. CME are an example of somebody who built their own in terms of pivot, but are actually pivoting off of that now and actually moving on to a collaboration with Symphony to build out not just the chat workflow, but also workflow automation as well. The way we see the world going is that essentially from that perspective, more exchanges will want to do that. But of course, just in the same way that you've got to get connectivity to a number of different exchanges, then how will that work for their chat platforms? We interoperate amongst all of those chat platforms. So if you're on Symphony and I'm on Teams, we can actually talk to each other through the interoperation of iPush-Pull. And of course, the big news just recently has been that Bloomberg are finally opening up. And given that most of the capital markets sort of flow, at least for rates, equities, etc., was very much going over Bloomberg. With them now opening up a chat API themselves, we'll be able to offer that as an additional service. And what shouldn't be forgotten, of course, is actually in some of these markets, WhatsApp is actually one of the true sort of communication messages. So the more esoteric products, or for a lot of the ags, commodities sort of markets where you've got farmers, etc., they're actually using WhatsApp as a way of actually communicating what they want to do with their brokerage entities.
What opportunities and challenges do you see for interoperability and data security?
By push-pull, bringing together one mechanism to get into all the various different chat platforms is going to be important. I suppose the way we look at the world is that if you think about the way that people distributed information and prices previously, you started off with Excel and you had your VBA and macro wizards. You then moved on from there to low-code, no-code. And now what we're finding is that people are using chatbots as a way of actually communicating information back and forth, if not actually using it for execution purposes as well in certain instances. But what you really need there is to make sure guardrails are there. They brought in regulation to monitor the way that Excel spreadsheets were being utilized. To my knowledge, they didn't do anything on the low-code, no-code side. But I can imagine going forward now, particularly if we move towards agentic bots, there's got to be guardrails in place to monitor what firms are doing on that side. You don't want Fred building something and then leaving the company and nobody knows what the bots are doing. So essentially where I push-pull build that is to build the guardrails around that to ensure that the regulation is actually there as well.
Why is CDM so critical for the future of tokenization?
Part of the problem, I think, is everybody looks at the sexy pieces. They talk about blockchain, they talk about tokenization, they look at smart contracts. If you go back to basics, it's all about sort of garbage in, garbage out. So in order to ensure that you're actually getting the right data that's going in to drive things like tokenization towards collateral mobility, you've got to ensure that everybody's using standardized data models. And from that perspective, the common domain model was adopted initially by ISDA for OTC derivatives like swaps, and now ICMA for repo and ISLA for securities lending. Rather than them all combined trying to run that process, they then given that up to Finos as an open source that everybody could utilize. But the principle behind that then is if everybody's got a common data model, this is effectively digitizing the master agreements for those particular industries. You've got the ability now to actually build what's effectively a golden record. So you can actually take in a trade execution message, you can feed it to the common domain model, you can also then send a message onto chain, have smart contracts run through the whole life cycle event so that you can automate in the same way that you've automated trading through algos, high frequency. What we see is that going further forward, operations will actually work towards that way as well, so that the common domain model will be a driver towards allowing people to have life cycle automation sort of through the process.
What's the impact of smart contracts and tokenization on market infrastructure?
So I think what T+1 settlement really shows is that there's gradually going to be a move towards T0. Yeah, there will be intraday settlement at some point in time. If we go to T+1 as an initial starting point, fine. But essentially the tools that you will need for that will need to be in place already. So the way we see that is that you have this common data standard that everybody can utilize, then goes into the ability to run that as smart contracts to automate the life cycle. That actually reduces the amount of breaks and fails that you're going to actually see in the system. If you need to get to a quicker settlement time, that obviously needs the ability to move through that process much more quickly. So we see that as being a key sort of part of that. But then that also links into the idea of tokenization, where either you have to move the instrument for settlement, so what we would call tokenized settlement, or if it was, for example, an intraday repo, then we would look at a digital twin, whereby we'd want to have the ability to replicate the underlying instrument, not moving it from where it is in custody or CSD, but allowing the rights that are behind that particular instrument to be moved in a tokenized form. So the key thing there, I think, is to recognize that tokenization can be fleeting. It's not the principle of like a Bitcoin and having something that's a tradable instrument. This is a means to an end, and that end is the collateral mobility.
What are the main barriers to scaling DeFi derivatives?
If you look at the volumes that go through relative to spot crypto transactions, if you look at any other cash market, the volumes that go through in the derivatives are a multiple of the turnover that you would see in the spot market. If you're looking at crypto at the moment, actually, that ratio is nowhere near what you would see in other more developed derivative markets. We think that part of the reason behind that is exactly the fact that there isn't capital efficiency in that market, that it's either completely collateralized or over-collateralized, and so therefore the ability of people to use a balance sheet to be able to operate is not good enough. And so from that perspective, if you can bring the idea of cross-margin benefits in, somebody who wants to, for example, go long Bitcoin, short Ethereum through the futures product, has then the offset between the two, and therefore is actually utilizing what we know and love from a normal TradFi perspective in terms of that capital efficiency. And then I think if we look at it, that becomes even more true for options. You really need to have that ability to be able to build a book and look at the cross-margin capability amongst that. That's what we're building towards as part of that process. And I think you've seen it now with platforms like Deribit being bought by Coinbase. Coinbase is seeing that as a huge development in terms of the amount of flow that could go through those options products. And if we look at the key market makers in the crypto space, a number of them are the people that we know and love so well in the traditional markets. They may put a different name on it, but the big option market makers, for example, are very, and high frequency and algo traders, are very active in this space as well. So I think what they would appreciate more is this ability to be able to move towards that.
Why choose futures and options with cross-margin over perpetual swaps for liquidity and risk?
The development of perps in the crypto space was probably much more a regulatory thing. If they'd gone towards futures and options, then they were closer to having to be regulated because whichever regulator that was looking at it would actually say, okay, that's in our space or domain, therefore we need to regulate this. By keeping it as a perp for the time being, that allowed them to effectively have CFDs, contract for differences, that would stay outside of kind of the normal regulatory domain. But the reality is actually they're pretty inefficient. Where do you see a constant maturity product that actually really works in any market? What we've seen is that the real development in markets have been around standardized tenors, whether that be in standard interest rate derivative products or the futures and options side. What's, I think, missed by a lot of people is that while you've got the benefits of 24/7 trading with a perp, actually the large exchanges that offer that are doing the most volumes, are actually charging effectively a roll. During that 24-hour period, they kind of have 8 clearing runs, as it were. 3 clearing runs, one every 8 hours. And so from that perspective, what they're doing is charging you a roll fee to actually just roll that position intraday. So it's actually quite expensive if people really look at it. I think, again, it's one of these things where people tend to be focused on the profit. They're not really looking at the cost. And so therefore, while things are going well, they don't care about the fees. But it's a pretty expensive model. And we've seen ourselves in the TradFi world that standardized futures and options is a much better way forward. And there's greater interoperability between the two products and being able to delta hedge or whatever else off the back of that.
What insights have you gained from following AI, blockchain, smart contracts, and tokenization?
We'll start with blockchain. Back in the day when I was still at Eurex, it's over 10 years ago, we were doing proof of concepts on Ethereum for the ways in which we could use blockchain. I think the problem has been that everybody has built their own. So they've all been doing their own proof of concept, which is kind of a bit of an oxymoron when it comes to blockchain, because the whole benefit really should be that everybody is using a common blockchain to really reap the benefits of it. Finally, I think we're getting to a point now where people recognize that. And there's actually moves afoot by various different people to look at some sort of interoperability with respect to chains or having a common utility chain. And we think personally that should actually be a public blockchain with confidentiality and on it, and so it could have permissions on it, but it shouldn't be private blockchains that are fully permissioned only for certain people. So I think that really opens things up, and what that kind of shows you is that adoption of any of these things really needs the market to come together as a whole. Whereas if I was looking at something like artificial intelligence, ChatGPT is a great example of where suddenly the world understood the power of being able to use something like AI through that mechanism. And so by virtue of the fact everybody was using it at home, it automatically kind of got adopted in the workplace. And so people were much more receptive to it, and it doesn't actually change your infrastructure. Effectively, it supports and complements what you already have rather than trying to replace things. So I would say that's the key thing, is that if I look at tokenization, then I would say that's somewhere in the middle. You can actually run your existing systems as they are today, but if you then want to bring in an element to allow the collateral mobility, then of course you could actually introduce the idea of tokenization for collateral mobility as part of that. So that could be complementary to the existing processes. So I think that's the key difference whenever anybody's looking at this, is how are you going to get the market to adopt it, and how quickly or how long will that take?
What should industry leaders prioritize as they navigate the convergence of TradFi and DeFi?
There's lessons to be learned from DeFi, particularly if we look at it from a clearing point of view. So while CVEX is using a TradFi portfolio margining approach, what the TradFi maybe should look at from the CVEX perspective is this idea of intraday flows. Means that actually you could look at a world where you don't need initial margin. You could actually have just variation margin, because you are effectively having a 5-minute run every 5 minutes to look at where you sit with respect to P&L, so that then deals with some of the issues around pro-cyclicality of margin sort of amounts. It looks at the issues with respect to the margin ability of the collateral mobility issues around margin, and how much margin do I need to have in place at given points in time. So I think those areas, they can learn from each other. Then, as I say, it comes back to it's really having information to make things much more efficient. So if I look at it from the push-pull side, being able to mine the data that's in chat platforms, and then using agentic bots to be able to actually have agent-to-agent actually information flow. And then from a Tokenovate perspective, the idea of being able to automate that lifecycle management and then lead into tokenization, which allows the collateral mobility. And then on the CVEX side, I think what they will be doing is also not just having their own clearing protocol, but also then having a trading platform that they could use for TradFi product. So if they've got a 24/7 platform, it may be that there are new products in the TradFi world that could actually use that platform as a mechanism themselves to actually start new markets.